I watched my sister Maya press the cheap eyebrow pencil against her skin, trying for the 100th time to recreate the shape that had become my signature. Her hand trembled with frustration as the line went crooked again, and I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. In my first life, she'd stolen everything from me: my designs, my scholarship, my fiancé, and finally, my life. But this time, I'd made sure to mark myself with something she could never replicate: professionally microbladed eyebrows with a technique so precise, so customized to my bone structure that any imitation would look like a child's drawing next to the Mona Lisa. Why won't it look right? Maya hissed at her reflection, unaware I was watching from the doorway. She'd been at it for 40 minutes now, trying to copy the sharp arch and delicate taper that the artist had spent 3 hours perfecting on my face 2 weeks ago. The tiny hair-like strokes were impossible to recreate with a pencil, and the golden ratio measurements that had guided the placement were calibrated specifically for my features. On her rounder face, with her lower brow bone, any attempt at duplication looked absurd. I knew this would happen. I'd planned for it because 3 months ago I died on my 25th birthday, poisoned by the sister standing in front of that mirror, and I woke up 10 years in the past in my 15-year-old body with every memory intact. The poison had been in the champagne Maya insisted we share to celebrate my engagement to Daniel Chen, the tech entrepreneur I'd met at a gallery showing of my fashion designs. I remembered the way the room spun, how Maya's face had gone from fake joy to cold satisfaction as I collapsed. I remembered her voice, clinical and detached. "You always had everything, Iris. The talent, the looks, the attention. Even mom and dad loved you more, no matter how hard I tried. So I made myself into you. I wore your style, I copied your designs, I even took your man. But it was never enough. You were still you, still better. So now I'll have it all, and you'll have nothing." She'd been copying me since we were children. When I wore my hair in a French braid, hers would be braided the next day. When I started painting my nails burgundy, her collection would suddenly overflow with the same shade. Our mother thought it was sweet, sisterly bonding. Our father called it flattery. I called it suffocating. But her obsession reached new heights when I started gaining recognition for my fashion designs in college. Maya, who'd struggled through a business degree with mediocre grades, suddenly became interested in collaborating with me. She'd photograph my sketches when I wasn't looking, copy my patterns, even steal fabric from my studio. When I confronted her, she cried to our parents that I was being selfish, refusing to share my inspiration with family. They took her side. They always took her side. "Iris needs to learn that family helps family," my mother had said, stroking Maya's hair while my sister sobbed crocodile tears into her shoulder. "You're being cruel, keeping your sister at arm's length." So I'd tried to be generous. I'd let Maya help with small projects, taught her basic draping techniques, even let her take credit for a few minor pieces. It was never enough. The more I gave, the more she took, until she wasn't just copying me. She was trying to become me. My signature eyebrow shape had developed naturally during my late teens in that first life. I'd always been good at makeup, and I'd spent hours perfecting an arch that complemented my oval face, elongated my eyes, and gave me a sophisticated editorial look. Beauty bloggers had started calling it the Iris brow after I posted a tutorial that went viral. Maya had been furious. She'd tried to copy it, of course, but her attempts were always slightly off. Her hand wasn't steady enough, her eye for proportion wasn't refined enough, and most importantly, her face shape was different enough that what looked elegant on me looked harsh on her. Still, she'd persisted, showing up to family dinners with increasingly desperate approximations, fishing for compliments that never came. Then I'd gotten engaged to Daniel, the handsome, brilliant entrepreneur who'd fallen in love with my designs and then with me. The engagement had been announced in the society pages: rising fashion designer to wed tech mogul. Maya's face had gone white when she saw the headline. 2 weeks later, I was dead. But death had given me a gift, a second chance. I'd woken up gasping in my childhood bedroom, 15 years old again, my body free from poison, but my mind heavy with 10 years of memories that hadn't happened yet. The shock had been overwhelming. I'd spent the first day convinced I was hallucinating, that I was dying and this was some cruel last dream. But the details were too specific, too consistent. My old desktop computer with the cracked screen, my faded purple bedspread, the poster of my favorite band that I'd taken down junior year, even the date on my phone, exactly 10 years before my death. I had been given an impossible gift: foreknowledge. I knew every betrayal that was coming, every design Maya would steal, every lie she'd tell, every manipulation she'd use to turn our parents against me. And I knew how she'd kill me a decade from now, given the chance. This time, I would make sure she never got that chance. But I'd also learned something crucial from my first life. Confronting Maya directly never worked. She was a master manipulator, able to twist any accusation into proof of my jealousy or cruelty. Our parents would always believe her tears over my anger. I needed to be smarter, more subtle. I needed to let her destroy herself while I built an unassailable life she couldn't touch. The eyebrows were just the beginning. In my first life, I developed my signature brow shape naturally over years, posting that viral Tsanese tutorial when I was 22. This time, I'd accelerated the timeline. At 15, I'd started researching microblading, a semi-permanent cosmetic tattooing technique that was just beginning to gain popularity. By 16, I'd saved enough money from my part-time job at a boutique to afford a session with the best artist in the city, a woman named Yuki who'd trained in Seoul and had a 2-year waiting list. I'd begged. I'd offered to model for her portfolio. I'd written her a 10-page letter explaining my vision for the perfect brow, complete with sketches and mathematical proportions. Something in my intensity must have moved her because she'd agreed to see me. "You're young to be this serious about cosmetics," Yuki had said during our consultation, studying my face with a professional's critical eye. "Most girls your age just want to look like whoever's popular on Instagram." "I'm not most girls," I'd replied. "I know exactly what I want and I know why I want it. These eyebrows aren't a trend for me. They're a signature. They're art." Yuki had smiled then, a real smile. "Show me." I'd presented my research: golden ratio measurements applied to brow architecture, color theory for choosing the perfect pigment to complement my skin's undertones, and detailed sketches of the brow shape I wanted. Not trendy Instagram brows with blocky fronts and dramatic arches, but something more refined, elegant, classical but modern. Each hair would be individually drawn, following the natural direction of growth, creating depth and dimension that pencil or powder could never achieve. "You've done your homework," Yuki had said, impressed. "I'll do it, but I'm going to customize it even further. Your bone structure is exceptional. High cheekbones, strong brow bone, well-proportioned features. We can create something truly unique to you, something nobody else could duplicate." She'd been right. The process had taken 3 hours. Yuki had measured my face from every angle, marked and remarked the shape until it was perfect, then used her tiny blade to implant pigment in thousands of delicate strokes. The result was breathtaking. Eyebrows that looked completely natural but impossibly perfect, with a shape so precisely tailored to my features that they seemed to have been designed by nature itself. More importantly, they were impossible to copy with conventional makeup. The individual hair strokes, the varying depths of pigment, the way they caught the light, these were the work of an artist's hand using professional tools and years of training. Maya's drugstore eyebrow pencil didn't stand a chance. When I'd come home from that first appointment, my brows still red and healing, Maya had stared at me with naked envy. "What did you do?" "Microblading," I'd said casually, touching the tender skin. "It's semi-permanent. Lasts about 2 years before you need a touch-up." "Where did you get it done? How much did it cost?" I'd smiled sweetly, but "Yuki, Tanaka did it. She has a 2-year waiting list and charges $5,000 for a full session. But she gave me a discount because I'm going to be in her portfolio." The lie about the discount had been deliberate. I wanted Maya to know this was something expensive, something exclusive, something that required not just money, but connections and recognition of talent. And I wanted her to know I'd gotten it at 16, establishing myself as a trendsetter before she could even think to compete. As I'd predicted, Maya had immediately started trying to copy the look with makeup. She'd bought expensive eyebrow pencils, pomades, powders, stencils. She'd watched hundreds of tutorials. She'd practiced for hours in front of her mirror, but she couldn't replicate what Yuki had done. She couldn't recreate the subtle variations in stroke thickness, the natural-looking fade at the front of the brow, the precise arch that Yuki had calculated using measurements specific to my bone structure. On Maya's rounder face, with her fuller cheeks and lower brow bone, every attempt looked like a caricature. The sharp arch that gave me a sophisticated edge made her look surprised or angry. The extended tail that elongated my eyes made hers look droopy, and because she was using makeup instead of microblading, her brows always looked drawn on and artificial, especially when they started to smudge or fade throughout the day. For the first time in my 2 lives, I had something Maya couldn't steal. But the eyebrows were just the opening move in a much longer game. The real turning point came 3 months after my rebirth, on a sunny Saturday morning when our mother announced that Maya had been accepted to the Parsons Fashion Summer Intensive Program. In my first life, I'd applied to this program at 17 and gotten in based on my portfolio. Maya, who'd shown no interest in fashion design until after I'd succeeded, had applied the next year and been rejected. She'd cried for days, blaming me for setting the bar too high and making the teachers expect too much. But this time, Maya was 16, and I was only 15. I hadn't applied yet. I'd been deliberately holding back, focusing on building my skills in secret, not showing my best work to anyone. I'd learned from my first life that showing my hand too early only gave Maya a roadmap for what to steal. So, how had Maya gotten into Parsons? The answer became clear when I accidentally walked into Maya's room while she was out and found her portfolio laid out on her desk, ready to be photographed for her social media announcement. I flipped through the pages, my jaw tightening with each turn. Every single piece was mine. Not similar to mine, not inspired by mine. They were exact copies of designs I'd created in my first life, stored in sketchbooks I'd kept hidden in my room, designs I'd submitted to Parsons at 17. But Maya couldn't have seen those sketchbooks. I'd burned them in this timeline the moment I'd realized I'd been reborn knowing she'd try to steal them. So where had she gotten these designs? The answer hit me like ice water. She must have photographed my sketchbooks in my first life, before I'd even applied to Parsons. She'd been planning this theft years in advance, on us funds, waiting for her chance. And in this timeline, with me holding back and her moving forward aggressively, she'd struck first, submitting my designs as her own. The betrayal was so calculated, so cold-blooded that for a moment I couldn't breathe. This wasn't simple copying or sisterly imitation. This was systematic theft. She'd been documenting my creative work like a spy, building an archive of my ideas to deploy whenever it suited her. In my first life, I'd confronted her about stolen designs and gotten nowhere. This time, I needed proof. Evidence so ironclad that even our parents couldn't deny it. I pulled out my phone and started photographing every page of her portfolio. Then I went to my room and pulled out the new sketchbooks I'd been working on. Designs I'd created since my rebirth, different from anything I'd done in my first life. I photographed those too, making sure the timestamps were visible. Then I did something I'd never dared to do in my first life. I went digital. I created a secure online portfolio, password protected and backed up to multiple cloud services. I documented every design with dated sketches, progress photos, and detailed notes about my inspiration and process. I created an unbreakable paper trail proving that these designs were mine, and then I waited. Maya's Instagram post about her Parsons acceptance went viral in our local fashion community. So honored and excited to spend this summer learning from the best, she'd written, alongside photos of her portfolio. The comments poured in. You're so talented. Can't wait to see what you create. Your sister must be so proud. That last comment was from our mother. I played the supportive sister for 2 weeks, congratulating Maya publicly while privately seething. Then I submitted my application to Parsons' sister program in Milan, an even more prestigious program that I'd only learned about too late in my first life. My portfolio showcased my new designs, the ones Maya hadn't seen, the ones that were documented with ironclad proof of ownership. I got in within a week. Not just accepted, courted. The director called me personally. Your portfolio is extraordinary, she said. The sophistication of your draping techniques, your understanding of textile behavior, your eye for proportion, these are the skills of someone much older. We'd like to offer you a full scholarship plus a stipend for materials. I accepted graciously, then posted about it on Instagram with strategic humility. Incredibly grateful for this opportunity to study in Milan this summer. Looking forward to learning from the masters of Italian tailoring and textile design. The fallout was immediate. Milan? Maya had shrieked when she saw my post. You applied to Milan? Why didn't you tell me? It was a long shot, I said, examining my perfectly microbladed brows in my compact mirror. I didn't want to jinx it. But I got into Parsons. We could have applied to partner programs, spent the summer together. I looked at her with practiced innocence. Oh, I didn't know you were interested in fashion design. You're majoring in business, right? Her face flushed. I'm exploring my creative side. That's great, I smiled. I'm sure Parsons will be perfect for you. Though I have to say, your portfolio looked really polished. Did you have help with those designs? The question landed like a grenade. Maya's flush deepened. No, they're mine, all mine. Impressive, Sas, I said, holding her gaze. They're very sophisticated for a first portfolio, almost like they were done by someone with years of experience. I left the threat hanging in the air and walked away, leaving Maya to wonder exactly how much I knew. The summer programs began in June. I flew to Milan and immersed myself in a world of Italian craftsmanship, learning from master tailors who'd been perfecting their art for generations. I studied the draping techniques that made Italian fashion legendary, learned to work with the most luxurious fabrics, and made connections with artisans who'd later become crucial to my career. Meanwhile, Maya struggled at Parsons. I knew this because our mother insisted we video chat every week to check in. During these calls, I could see the strain in Maya's face. She'd talk about how challenging the coursework was, how the instructors were so demanding, how the other students were so competitive. Between the lines, I could read the truth. She was drowning. The portfolio she'd submitted had been my work, but the actual skills required to complete the program were ones she didn't possess. She couldn't drape like I could, couldn't sketch with my precision, couldn't problem solve through construction challenges. Maybe fashion isn't really my thing, she admitted in our 4th week of classes, looking haggard. Maybe I should go back to business. Don't give up, our mother said immediately, her face filling the screen on the group call. You were so excited about this program. Remember how beautiful your portfolio was? But I can't seem to recreate that quality in class, Maya said, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. It's like I've lost my touch. Artist's block, our father suggested. Every creative person goes through it. I said nothing, just watched my sister squirm. Because I knew the truth. She'd never had it to lose. She'd only ever had my stolen work, and now, faced with creating something original, she was exposed as the fraud she was. By the end of summer, the contrast between us was stark. I returned from Milan with a portfolio of completed garments that had earned praise from some of Italy's most respected fashion authorities, a list of artisan contacts who wanted to collaborate with me, and a formal invitation to return the following summer for an advanced program. My Instagram following had grown to 50,000, and fashion blogs were calling me a rising star to watch. Maya returned from Parsons with incomplete projects, mediocre grades, and a recommendation that she consider other career paths where her strengths might be better utilized. The humiliation was exactly what she deserved, but I knew her well enough to know it would only make her more dangerous. A desperate Maya was an unpredictable Maya. I needed to stay 10 steps ahead. That's when I made my next move. I started dating James Chen. Not Daniel Chen, the tech mogul who'd been my fiancé in my first life and whom Maya had stolen from me. Daniel had been a mistake. Brilliant and successful, yes, but also shallow and easily manipulated. Maya had seduced him by playing the role of supportive girlfriend while poisoning his perception of me as too ambitious, too consumed by work. In my first life, I'd loved him. In this life, with the clarity of hindsight, I could see he'd never truly loved me. He'd loved my success, my rising star, the prestige of being associated with me. James Chen was Daniel's younger brother, and in my first life, I'd barely known him. He'd been quiet, bookish, more interested in sustainable architecture than in tech startups. But I'd learned something crucial about James at Daniel and Maya's wedding. Yes, they'd gotten married in my first life after I was dead. James had been in love with me. He'd confessed it drunkenly to a groomsman, saying he'd never forgiven Daniel for sweeping Iris off her feet, and that he'd known she was special from the moment they met. I'd been too dead to do anything with that information in my first life. But in this timeline, James was 17 to my 16, and I'd made sure to meet him at a gallery opening I'd attended specifically because I knew he'd be there. "You're Iris Zhang, aren't you?" he'd said, approaching me as I studied a sculpture. "I saw your work on Instagram. The pieces you made in Milan are incredible." "Thank you," I'd replied, turning to face him. He was tall, with thoughtful eyes and an easy smile, handsome in a quieter way than his brother, but more genuine. "I don't think we've met." "James Chen." He'd offered his hand. "I'm studying architecture, but I've always been interested in fashion as a form of structural design. The way fabric interacts with the body, the engineering of a garment, it's not that different from how buildings interact with their environment." I'd been charmed despite myself. In my first life, I'd been so focused on Daniel's charisma that I'd never really noticed James. But now, with the perspective of two lives, I could see what I'd missed: substance, depth, genuine interest in me as a person, not just as an accessory to his own success. We'd started dating 2 weeks later. Maya had been livid. "You're dating James Chen?" she'd demanded when she found out. "Daniel's little brother?" "Daniel and I have never dated," I said truthfully. In this timeline, we hadn't. "Why would that matter?" Because the Chens are... You're doing this to..." She'd stumbled over her words, unable to articulate her anger, without revealing that she'd been planning to target Daniel herself. In my first life, she'd maneuvered herself into Daniel's orbit by interning at his company. In this timeline, she hadn't had the chance. She'd been too busy failing at Parsons. "Are you interested in James?" I asked innocently. "Because I can introduce you. He has an older brother, Daniel, who runs a tech company. Very successful. Maybe more your type?" The trap was so obvious that even Maya could see it. If she went after Daniel now, she'd look like she was copying me again. My boyfriend's brother. And Daniel wasn't the prize he'd once been. He was just starting his company, years away from the success he'd achieve later. In my first life, Maya had targeted him when he was already successful and I was already engaged to him. Without that framework, he was just another entrepreneur with potential. But James was different. James was mine, genuinely mine, in a way Daniel never was. And I could see it drove Maya crazy. My relationship with James developed naturally over the next year. He was patient, thoughtful, supportive of my work without trying to control it. He'd come to my studio and sit quietly while I worked, sometimes sketching architectural designs while I draped fabric on my dress form. We'd talk about the mathematics of beauty, the balance between form and function, the way good design, whether fashion or architecture, could elevate the human experience. "You're different from other girls I've dated," he'd told me once, 6 months into our relationship. "You're so focused, so driven. You know exactly what you want to create, and you're not afraid to work for it." "Is that a good thing?" I'd asked, remembering how Daniel had eventually complained about my obsessive work habits. "It's everything," James had said simply. "You're going to change the fashion world, Iris. I can feel it." He'd been right. By the time I was 17, I'd already started my own line. Nothing major, just limited runs of custom pieces sold through a carefully curated Instagram presence and a small boutique that specialized in emerging designers. But the response had been overwhelming. Fashion bloggers called my aesthetic ethereally architectural. Vogue's teen supplement featured me in an article about Gen Z designers to watch. And most importantly, every piece I released sold out within hours. Maya, meanwhile, had dropped out of her business program and was working as a sales associate at a department store. "I don't understand what happened to her," our mother lamented over dinner one night when Maya was too tired to join us. "She was so promising, her portfolio was beautiful, and now she can't seem to find her direction." "Maybe fashion wasn't really her passion," I suggested gently, twirling pasta on my fork. "Maybe she was just exploring." "But she worked so hard on that portfolio," our father insisted. "Those designs were extraordinary." Yes, I agreed. They were. I let the implication hang in the air, watching my parents' faces. They weren't stupid. They'd seen Maya struggle. They'd seen her fail to produce anything comparable to that extraordinary portfolio. And now, with me succeeding while Maya floundered, the question was starting to form in their minds. Where had those designs really come from? I didn't push it. Not yet. I just continued to succeed, continued to build my empire, continued to be the daughter they'd always wished Maya could be. And I watched Maya's jealousy curdle into something darker. The final confrontation came during my 18th birthday party. James and I were celebrating our 2-year anniversary along with my birthday, and he'd rented out an entire gallery space to showcase my latest collection, Rebirth, a line inspired by phoenixes, resurrection, and second chances. The pieces were my best work yet. Dramatic, sculptural gowns with intricate beadwork that caught the light like flames. Structured jackets with origami-like folds. Flowing pieces that seemed to defy gravity. Every piece told a story about rising from ashes, about transformation, about becoming more powerful after surviving destruction. Maya had arrived late, already drunk, wearing a dress she'd clearly tried to style like one of mine. But where my aesthetic was precise and architectural, her interpretation was sloppy, the proportions wrong, the styling confused, the overall effect more costume than couture. She'd stumbled through the gallery, knocking into displays, making loud comments about how derivative my work was, how I'd clearly copied various other designers. A few guests had looked uncomfortable, but most ignored her, recognizing the behavior for what it was: jealous sister syndrome. Then she'd cornered me in front of my centerpiece, a wedding gown that had taken me 3 months to construct, with hand-beaded flames rising from the hem to the bodice, transforming from red to gold to white in an ombre that suggested purification through fire. "You think you're so special," Maya had hissed, swaying slightly. "You think your perfect eyebrows and your perfect boyfriend and your perfect designs make you better than me. But I know the truth." "And what truth is that?" I'd asked calmly, aware that we'd attracted an audience. "That you're a fake, that you steal, that you—" She'd stopped, seemed to realize she was about to expose herself, and pivoted. "That you've been sabotaging me all along. You made sure I'd fail at Parsons. "I made sure you'd fail?" I'd interrupted, my voice still calm but carrying across the gallery. "Maya, I was in Milan. How exactly did I sabotage you in New York?" You put me in a position to fail. You set me up." "By succeeding?" I'd tilted my head, the movement calculated to draw attention to my perfect brows. "By working hard and creating original designs? Is that what you call sabotage?" "Those designs in your portfolio," she'd started, and I'd known she was about to accuse me of stealing from her, trying to flip the script, "are all documented with dates, process photos, and detailed notes," I'd finished smoothly. "Available for anyone to review, including the dates showing when I created each piece, which, interestingly, all predate your Parsons application." The gallery had gone quiet. Maya's face had turned white, then red. "In fact," I'd continued, pulling out my phone, "I've been meaning to ask you about something. These designs you submitted to Parsons?" I'd pulled up photos I'd taken of her portfolio. They look remarkably similar to sketches from my old sketchbooks, the ones I kept in high school, before I even applied to Milan. I'd swiped through the photos, showing them side by side with my time-stamped documentation. The similarity was undeniable. More than similar. Identical. I don't," Maya had stammered. "At first I thought maybe we'd both been inspired by the same things." I'd continued, my voice sympathetic. "Great minds think alike, right?" But then I realized, these sketches of yours are photocopies. Literally. The smudge on this one from when I spilled coffee on my sketchbook? It's in your version too. And this stray pen mark? Also identical. The crowd had murmured. James had moved to stand beside me, his presence supportive but silent. "You went through my room," I'd said, my voice harder now. "You photographed my sketchbooks. You stole my designs and submitted them as your own. And when you couldn't replicate my skills in class, when you couldn't produce original work of the same quality because you'd never actually created those designs, you failed. Not because I sabotaged you, because you sabotaged yourself. You can't prove any of that, Maya had spat, but her voice was shaking. Actually, I can. I'd pulled up my cloud storage on my phone, showing the gallery my organized files. Every sketch, dated and backed up. Every design, documented from concept to completion. Every technique, recorded and time-stamped. I have years of proof that these designs are mine. What proof do you have that they're yours? Maya had opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. I tried to be generous with you, I'd said, and I'd meant it. In another life, I'd caught myself, in another situation, maybe I would have been happy to collaborate with you, to help you develop your own style. But you didn't want collaboration. You wanted to be me. You wanted to erase me and take my place. That's not... You copied everything. My style, my makeup, my designs. You thought if you could just imitate me perfectly enough, you'd have what I have. But you can't copy talent, Maya. You can't steal skill. You can't photocopy passion. I'd gestured to my eyebrows, the same ones she'd been trying to replicate for years. You couldn't even copy these, because they're not just makeup, they're custom artwork, created specifically for my face by an artist with years of training. Just like my designs aren't just dresses, they're the result of years of study, practice, and original creative vision. You can copy the surface, but you'll never have the substance. Maya had let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. Then she'd lunged at me. James had stepped between us, but he needn't have bothered. 2 security guards were already moving in, having been alerted by the disturbance. They'd escorted Maya out while she'd screamed about how I'd ruined her life and stolen everything from her. The irony hadn't been lost on anyone in the gallery. After she'd been removed, I'd turned to my guests, fashion bloggers, boutique owners, fellow designers, and even a few journalists who'd come to cover the event. I apologize for the disruption, I'd said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Family dynamics can be complicated. But I hope you'll stay and enjoy the collection. Every piece here represents not just design, but resilience, the ability to rise from difficult circumstances and create something beautiful. The applause had been deafening. The next day, the story was everywhere. Not the version Maya would have wanted, not a story about a mean sister who refused to help her sibling. Instead, it was a story about artistic integrity, about a young designer who'd been quietly dealing with plagiarism from a family member for years. The time-stamped evidence I'd shared had been dissected by every fashion blog and forum. Maya's stolen portfolio had been compared point by point with my documented designs. The verdict was unanimous. Maya had committed academic fraud, submitted stolen work to Parsons, and built her entire brief fashion career on plagiarized designs. Parsons released a statement revoking her acceptance retroactively and demanding repayment of any scholarship funds. The department store where she worked fired her for bringing disrepute to their brand. And our parents, finally forced to confront the truth they'd been avoiding, had demanded Maya move out and figure out her own path. But I wasn't finished yet. Because in my first life, Maya hadn't just stolen my designs and my boyfriend. She'd poisoned me, she'd murdered me, and while I couldn't prove a crime that hadn't happened in this timeline, I could make absolutely certain she'd never have the opportunity. That's when I called my grandmother. Grandmother Zhang was my father's mother, a formidable woman who'd made her fortune in real estate and textile manufacturing. In my first life, I'd been close to her, but she'd died when I was 20, just a year before my engagement to Daniel. I'd grieved her deeply, wishing she could have seen me succeed. In this timeline, she was 75 and sharp as ever. Iris, she'd said when I'd called her the day after my gallery opening, I've been reading about your drama with your sister. I'm sorry if it's embarrassing for the family, I'd started, but she'd cut me off. Embarrassing? I'm proud of you. Her voice had been fierce. You stood up for yourself. You protected your work. Your father and his wife have always coddled that girl, let her get away with murder. The word had made me flinch, figuratively speaking. It's about time someone held her accountable. Thank you, grandmother. I want to invest in your line, she'd said abruptly. 50% ownership in exchange for $5 million in funding and access to my textile mills in Shanghai. You'll have complete creative control, and I'll handle the business side until you're ready to take it over. What do you say? I'd said yes. Obviously. With my grandmother's backing, my small independent line became a legitimate fashion house within 6 months. We launched with a full collection at New York Fashion Week, where my Rebirth pieces made a splash that had editors and buyers fighting for orders. My designs were featured in Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Elle. Celebrities started wearing my pieces to red carpets. And when Fashion Magazine did a profile on me at 19, they titled it The Phoenix Designer: How Iris Zhang Rose from Family Betrayal to Fashion Fame. The article detailed everything: Maya's plagiarism, the years of copying, the confrontation at the gallery, and my grandmother's investment. It painted me as a survivor, a fighter, a young woman who'd overcome jealousy and theft to build something authentic and valuable. Maya tried to give her own interview, tried to spin the story as one of sisterly rivalry gone too far, tried to claim she'd been inspired by me rather than stealing. But no one believed her. The evidence was too damning, the timeline too clear, and her own lack of subsequent work too revealing. The last I heard, she was working as a hostess at a mid-tier restaurant and had been banned from every fashion program in the country for academic dishonesty. Meanwhile, I was thriving. James and I got engaged on my 20th birthday. Not to rush things, but because we both knew what we wanted. He'd started his own architectural firm specializing in sustainable design, and our relationship had become a genuine partnership. Two creative professionals who understood and supported each other's vision. The wedding was planned for the following spring, a year away. I was designing my own dress, of course, not the beaded gown from my Rebirth collection, but something new. Something that represented not resurrection from death, but the joy of a life well lived, because that was the real difference between this life and my last one. In my first life, I'd been reactive, always defending myself from Maya's attacks, always trying to prove I deserved my success, always one step behind. I'd been so focused on being good enough that I'd never stopped to enjoy being good. In this life, I'd been proactive. I'd used my foreknowledge not just to avoid Maya's sabotage, but to build something she couldn't touch. The microbladed eyebrows had been a symbol, a way of marking myself as someone who couldn't be replicated. But the real work had been everything that came after: the documented portfolio, the strategic timing, the public exposure of her fraud, the alliance with my grandmother. I'd learned that revenge wasn't just about punishing those who wronged you. It was about building a life so successful, so unassailable, so genuinely fulfilling that their attempts to hurt you became irrelevant. Maya had tried to become me, but she'd failed because she'd only ever seen the surface. She'd never understood that the real source of my success wasn't my eyebrows or my designs. It was my work ethic, my passion, my willingness to learn and grow and risk failure. She'd thought she could steal my identity like a dress off a rack, slip it on, and become someone new. But identity isn't clothing. It's not something you can borrow or copy or steal. It's built through years of choices, through discipline and dedication, through the courage to be yourself, even when being yourself is hard. Maya had never wanted to do that work. She'd wanted the rewards without the effort, the acclaim without the skill, the success without the struggle. And in the end, that's what had destroyed her. Not me, not my exposure of her plagiarism, but her own refusal to become someone real. 6 months before my wedding, Maya reached out. It was a long email, rambling and self-pitying, full of explanations and justifications and demands that I forgive her and give her another chance. She claimed she'd been sick with jealousy, that she'd needed help, that I was cruel for not understanding her mental health struggles. I read it once, then deleted it. Because I'd learned something crucial from dying and being reborn, some people don't deserve forgiveness. Some people, when given chances, only use them to hurt you more deeply. Maya had spent years, 2 lifetimes from my perspective, trying to destroy me. She'd stolen my work, she'd copied my identity, and in the timeline that no longer existed, she'd killed me. I didn't owe her forgiveness. I didn't owe her understanding. I didn't owe her anything at all. 3 months before the wedding, my grandmother pulled me aside at a family dinner. Your sister is telling people you've cut her off without cause, she said bluntly, that you've poisoned the family against her. And what do you think? I asked. Grandmother studied me with her sharp black eyes. I think you're smarter than people give you credit for. I think you saw something in Maya that the rest of us missed, and I think you protected yourself before she could do worse than steal your designs. The assessment was so accurate it took my breath away. You knew? I'm old, not blind. She patted my hand. I saw how she looked at you sometimes, like she wanted to consume you. It reminded me of, she paused, of someone I knew once. Someone dangerous, someone who would have destroyed me if I'd let her. What did you do? The same thing you did. I built a life she couldn't touch, and I made sure she could never hurt me again. Grandmother's smile was fierce. You're my granddaughter, Iris. Of course you're a survivor. The wedding took place on a perfect spring day in a garden venue that James had helped design. The ceremony was intimate, just close friends and family, carefully curated. Maya was not invited. Neither were several other relatives who'd taken her side or called me unforgiving. I'd learned that cutting toxic people from your life wasn't cruelty, it was self-care. My wedding dress was a masterpiece, if I say so myself. Ivory silk with subtle gold embroidery that caught the light like sunrise, structured but flowing, modern but timeless. And most importantly, completely original. A design no one could copy because it existed only in this moment. For this bride, for this story. James cried when he saw me walking down the aisle, and I cried too, but they were happy tears, grateful tears, because I'd been given something most people never get, a second chance at life, and the wisdom to use it well. The reception was perfect. My grandmother gave a toast about resilience and rising above pettiness. James's parents, who'd never warmed to Maya in my first life and loved me in this one, welcomed me to the family with genuine warmth. And my parents, who'd finally opened their eyes to Maya's true nature, hugged me and whispered apologies I'd never gotten in my first life. We should have seen it sooner, my mother said, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. We should have protected you better. It's okay, I said, and meant it, because in this timeline, I'd protected myself. I didn't need their protection anymore. I just needed their love. And finally, I had it. At the end of the night, James and I stood on the terrace overlooking the garden, his arm around my waist, watching the stars come out. You know what I love about you? He said quietly. You're the strongest person I've ever met, but you're not hard. You've dealt with so much, but you're still kind, still generous, still capable of joy. I learned something important, I told him, leaning into his warmth. Revenge isn't about becoming cruel. It's about refusing to let cruel people make you small. Is that what you did with Maya? Refuse to be small? I did more than that. I looked up at him, at his dear familiar face, and decided to tell him a truth I'd never shared with anyone. I refused to die. He thought I was being metaphorical. He pulled me closer and kissed my forehead just above my perfect eyebrows and murmured something about being glad I'd survived. If only he knew. But some secrets were meant to be kept. Some truths were too strange to share, even with the person you loved most. So I just smiled and let him hold me, grateful for this life, this love, this second chance I'd seized with both hands and refused to waste. Because that was the final lesson of my rebirth. Life isn't a gift you receive, it's a fight you win. And I'd won mine by becoming the best version of myself, the version Maya had always been too afraid to let me be. Years passed. My fashion house grew into an empire. We expanded into accessories, beauty products, and eventually a full lifestyle brand. My grandmother retired and left me in charge, confident I'd continue building the legacy she'd started. James's architecture firm flourished, and we collaborated on several projects that blended fashion and design. Boutiques that were works of art, showrooms that doubled as galleries, spaces that celebrated the intersection of form and function. We had 2 children, both daughters. I named them Joy and Grace, because those were the qualities I'd fought so hard to claim in my second life. I taught them early about the difference between inspiration and imitation, about the importance of originality, about standing up for themselves while still being kind. And when they asked about their Aunt Maya, because of course they'd eventually hear she existed, I told them the truth. Some people in life will try to take what's yours, I said. Your work, your ideas, your identity. And when that happens, you have two choices. You can let them make you bitter, or you can let them make you better, stronger, more careful, more yourself. Which did you choose? Grace, my younger daughter, asked. I touched my eyebrows, faded now, needing another touch-up after all these years, but still distinctly mine, still uncopyable. I chose to become someone nobody could replicate. I chose to be so completely myself that any imitation looked like a cheap fake. And Aunt Maya? She chose to be a copy, and copies are never as valuable as originals. It was harsh, but it was true. And I'd learned through painful experience that protecting your children sometimes meant teaching them harsh truths before the world taught them even harsher lessons. Maya never recovered from her disgrace. I heard updates occasionally. She'd moved cities, changed careers, tried to reinvent herself. But the internet never forgets, and her plagiarism scandal followed her everywhere. Last I heard, she was working in retail management somewhere out west using our mother's maiden name, trying to escape her past. I felt no pity. She'd had every opportunity to become her own person, to develop her own talents, to find her own path. Instead, she'd chosen theft and deception. She'd chosen, in the timeline I'd erased by being reborn, to choose murder. Some people don't deserve second chances. I'd gotten one only through cosmic accident or divine intervention or whatever force had sent me back in time. But I'd used it wisely. I'd become not just successful, but whole. Not just wealthy, but happy. Not just powerful, but at peace. On my 40th birthday, I hosted a retrospective of my work at a major art museum. 25 years of designs from my earliest pieces in Milan to my latest couture collection. The exhibition was titled Original: The Art of Iris Zhang, and it traced my evolution as a designer through the lens of authenticity. Every piece was accompanied by sketches, notes, process photos, the full documentation I'd started keeping at 15 when I'd first realized I needed to protect my work. The exhibition didn't just showcase my designs, it celebrated the creative process itself, the hard work and false starts and gradual refinement that went into original art. Standing in the gallery surrounded by my life's work with James and our daughters beside me, with my grandmother, 90 now but still sharp, beaming with pride, with friends and colleagues and former students celebrating my legacy, I felt something I'd never felt in my first life: complete. Because I'd done more than survive Maya's betrayal. I'd transcended it. I'd built a life so rich, so full, so undeniably mine that her attempts to copy me had become nothing more than a footnote in my story. Not even a cautionary tale, just a minor obstacle I'd overcome on my way to something greater. That night, after the crowds had gone and my family had returned to the hotel, I stood alone in the gallery, looking at my wedding dress displayed in the center of the exhibition. It was the piece I was most proud of, not because it was my most technically accomplished work, though it was certainly that, but because it represented the moment I'd finally, truly left my first life behind. I'd worn that dress to marry James, to commit to a future I'd built from scratch, to celebrate a love Maya had never managed to poison. And now it hung here, preserved and perfect, a symbol of everything I'd fought for and won. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I saw the exhibition announcement. Congratulations, you won. Are you happy now? Maya, still bitter after all these years, still obsessed with me, even after 2 decades of separation. I could have ignored her, should have, probably. But something in me wanted her to understand, finally, the fundamental truth she'd always missed. I typed carefully. I didn't win because I beat you. I won because I became myself. You were never my competition, Maya. You were always competing with a version of me you'd invented, a version you thought you could steal. But the real me? I was busy building something you never even saw, something you still can't see. I hit send, then blocked the number. I didn't need her response, didn't need her understanding or acknowledgement or closure. I'd found my closure years ago, in the moment I'd decided to use my rebirth not for revenge, but for redemption. Not hers, but my own. Because that was the secret truth about second chances. They're not about fixing your mistakes. They're about learning from them, about becoming the person you were always meant to be if fear and hurt and other people's expectations hadn't gotten in the way. I touched my eyebrows one last time, a habit I'd never quite broken all these years later. They'd faded significantly, the microblading needing regular touch-ups as the years passed. Yuki had retired, but she'd trained protégés who maintained her exacting standards. My brows were still perfect, still precisely calibrated to my features, still impossible to replicate without professional skill and artistic vision. But they were also, I'd realized, just eyebrows. The real signature I'd left on the world wasn't a cosmetic enhancement. It was my work, my vision, my refusal to be anything less than authentically myself. Maya had tried to copy my eyebrows and failed. But even if she'd succeeded, even if she'd found a way to perfectly replicate them, it wouldn't have mattered. Because you can't copy someone's soul. You can't steal their passion or plagiarize their courage or imitate their willingness to rise from the ashes. I walked out of the gallery into the cool night air, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of my past, both lives, settle into something manageable. Something I could carry without being crushed by it. Because I'd learned the ultimate truth about betrayal and rebirth. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's creation. It's building a life so beautiful, so true, so undeniably yours that the people who tried to tear you down become irrelevant. They fade into the background of your story, minor characters in a narrative they never understood. Maya had wanted to be me, but she'd never understood that being me meant being willing to die and start over, to face your worst moments and refuse to be broken by them, to look at a sister's betrayal and choose not bitterness but growth. She'd seen the surface, the eyebrows, the success, the acclaim, and thought that was the prize. She'd never seen the foundation, the hours in the studio, the rejection and criticism, the constant work of becoming better, the choice to keep creating even when people tried to steal what you made. And that's why she'd lost. Not because I'd beaten her, but because she'd never been running the same race. I'd been running toward myself. And in the end, that's the race we all have to run alone. I pulled out my phone and took a selfie in front of the gallery, my retrospective banner visible behind me, my perfect brows catching the light. I posted it to Instagram with a simple caption, 25 years of staying true. Thank you to everyone who's been part of this journey. Here's to the next chapter. The phoenix emoji was deliberate, a reminder of where I'd started in this life and how far I'd risen. Within minutes, the comments poured in. Congratulations, expressions of love, lengthy paragraphs about how my work had inspired people to be more authentic, more brave, more themselves. And somewhere among them, I knew, would probably be a comment from Maya, a fake account, words meant to wound or claim credit or rewrite history. But I'd never see it. I'd trained my team to filter out negativity, and I'd trained myself not to care. Because that was the final victory. Not silencing your enemies, but making their voices irrelevant. I walked back to my hotel where James was probably already asleep and my daughters were definitely sneaking looks at their phones past bedtime. Tomorrow we'd tour the rest of the city, visit museums and cafes and all the places I'd discovered in my first life and introduced to my family in this one. But tonight, in this moment, I was complete, whole. Unbroken by betrayal because I'd used it as a forge to strengthen myself, not a weapon to diminish who I was. Maya had copied my eyebrows and failed, but in failing, she'd given me the greatest gift, the knowledge that I was uncopyable, unreplicable, one of a kind. And that knowledge, more than any revenge, more than any success, was what had set me free.